So, welcome everyone to the DSOLG and our 6th anniversary. So, give us another one. Big round of applause. And none of this would have been possible without Michael, of course. Where's Michael? Is he around?
Looking around the back.
He's hiding. He's around the back.
Give him a round of
Good,
applause.
Michael.
There he is.
Take a bow, Michael. Michael set this up way back in 2017.
Arithmetic, not your strong
The
point.
pandemic was a word in the dictionary that no one ever looked up. But here we are, 6 years on. Great crowd here tonight. Probably our best turnout since the pandemic. So thank you everybody for coming along tonight. Hopefully you all got a raffle ticket as you came in. If you don't have a raffle ticket, go to Frankie. She'll give you a raffle ticket. And hopefully you all got a business card as well in the last 2 or 3 minutes. Again, if you haven't got one of these, go to Frankie. She'll give you one. This has got a QR code on it, which you will need later.
To invaluable prizes.
To win a valuable.
A valuable prize, yeah. Good to go?
Yeah, good to go, I think.
Big thanks to our speaker and to Veracode. Big applause for Veracode for providing not just the speaker, but the venue and the food and the drinks. And some very special prizes in the raffle, which we will reveal later.
So
This is sort of us.
This is us.
Yeah.
This is
If we were sexy cartoons.
yeah.
Jess sends her apologies. She threw up in a tube station on the way here and understandably turned around and left. But otherwise,
Yeah.
if you need to contact us for any reason, we will have further contact details shortly. Team at DSOLG.com is the way to contact us, along with our website, which has just been revamped and apparently doesn't have our shopping on it to buy our t-shirts
I know,
anymore.
I've been asked that already.
Oops,
So we need to
screwed
do
up. Otherwise, we're on LinkedIn, YouTube, podcast. This is being streamed on YouTube right now. We don't tell anybody, but it's there for posterity. Should you miss something, should you want slides, should you want some way to review the amazing evening you've got, it will be on YouTube.
And of course, we also have a podcast. The no, I'm not going to say what it's called.
Yeah, who knows what it's called?
No, we have a podcast, and we talk to various guests, mostly people that have been to DSLG and given a talk. Our next one's due out on the 2nd of October. The one came out last week on the 4th. That was with Ronnie. Yeah, it was with Ronnie. Yeah, go and listen to those podcasts. If you'd like the podcast, please give us a review and tell everyone about it, because we'd like to get our numbers up. And the more numbers that listen to it, the better it is for you guys, because it means that our story gets out there. We also like to give a shout out to a number of our friends, other organizations that run meetups. So we have OWASP. I saw Sam here. Sam, talk about OWASP. What's coming up?
OWASP London chapter. So we'll run regular meetups. The next meetup date is still to be confirmed. We're trying to get TikTok office for the next meetup. However, the next Capture the Flag event for developers is confirmed. It's going to be 24th of October at Monzo offices. If you have any developers and you want them to compete to prove how secure they are, if they know secure coding, send them to the event. Cheers.
And you use Eventbrite, don't you, Sam? Use Eventbrite, yeah? So you're on Eventbrite.
Eventbrite and meetup as well. Both.
And Meetup. So go to Meetup or Eventbrite and you can register for any of those events.
And we can, so we let Roy, where are you?
Roy,
All right, here we go.
Hi everyone, so I'm Roy Harrow. I'm here representing the British Computer Society DevSecOps group. So we're not competing with this organisation, we're complementary, totally different. And so we'd love to have you to come and join us at our event in 2 weeks' time on Wednesday, the 27th of September. So to find us, it's very easy. You just look up BCS, DevSecOps group, and you'll find us there. And you can look up some of the past events, listen to some of those and read about us. And in 2 weeks' time, 27th, we've got someone speaking on secrets management. So it'd be great if you could come along.
Cool. And
I'm sorry.
we also have Ladies of London Hacking Society here. Dida, do you want to?
I have so many stuff I can't wait to stand up. But yeah, Ladies of London Hacking Society, please do send your female colleagues to us. We're now competing against Sam because we're also on the 24th of October. We will have SQL Basics and some fun. And it will be at Just Eat Offense, the new, refurbished, bigger, better.
But not competing.
And some of the other ones as well, London DevOps. From London DevOps. We don't have anyone here from there, do we? But they also run some really good events as well. They're up to about the 80th event. They just had 3 online events over the summer, but they're back to live for the next event. So look out for them. There's some great talkers. If you go to their video channel, the YouTube channel, you can see a lot of videos they've done over the last year. You've had Bill Bensing, John Willis. You've had some great speakers on there, so go and check it out.
Good to go.
Yeah.
Do we have any from Statistic here? Well, thank you to our sponsors. Our sponsors have given us loads of support over the last few years in terms of prizes and venues and just financial assistance. Statistic is one of them. A lot of people know Statistic for their open source project Falco. I'm a big fan of that in terms of observability. It translates directly into a security platform for cloud data application protection platform. Do go check out Statistic. Next, Prisma Cloud. I would be lying if I didn't say I actually work there. So securing applications from cloud to cloud, enabling security and DevOps to effectively collaborate and accelerate cloud native application. I'm just reading what it says, so I'm not biased, development and deployment. It is a very good solution. I would not work there if I did not support it. Go check that out. And finally, I know we have somebody from Apiro. There's Simon right there.
Hello. Have you heard of Apiro? Anyone? Is that? No, it's not. Yes, people. Have you heard of ASPN? There's another acronym. We need another acronym in the AppSec space. So that's what we do. We're a cloud native application security platform. So we help folks like yourselves prioritize as to what risks you should be remediating from a business impact perspective, making sense of a lot of the noise that comes from a lot of typically noisy SCA, SAS scanners, etc. We partner with the likes of Veracode and others. So we can ingest findings from those tools. We can analyze and surface alerts from our own analysis of your source code, and we help sort of, I guess, close the loop on that sort of remediation workflow, if you like. That's Apiro. Love to chat to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Simon. Yeah, Apiro, very sexy newcomer in the application security for cloud space. Go check them out.
And we really are grateful to all of our sponsors. So I just want to put that out there as well. So thank you to all our sponsors for helping us get this far. Well, if you also like to be a speaker here at one of these events, we're always on the lookout for speakers. We have 2 formats. You can either do a lightning talk, which is usually about 15, 20 minutes. And it's a really good opportunity if you've never spoken before to come along and talk about something that might interest you, that might interest everybody else here. And there's no pressure. You can come along, just do 15, 20 minutes. Or if you've got a talk that you're looking to deliver at another event and you want to see how it is, come along, give part of it here. That's absolutely fine too. So that's what we're looking for. The second format is a longer format. So that's the sort of thing that you're going to see tonight, which is about 35, 40 minutes long, maybe a bit longer. We've had an hour and a half before. So but we can have longer talks and we'd be grateful for anybody who wants to come along and share some ideas with everybody. It could be any topic related to DevSecOps. So please do get in touch through team@dslg.com and we'd love to hear from you.
All right, but hype. Save the date, October 4th, DTX Europe. It's at Excel. We have a spot. Is the time on here? Not quite, but you can look up DTX. What? 4:15 at DTX. It's an amazing, if you've never been to, it's called Data Transformation Expo. That sounds good. They've got everything from where to buy copper, to buy cables, to buy routers, to all the way to the cloud security at the very end. So you can do an entire supply chain of data transformation in one place. It is pretty amazing. And we have a session with what we're calling the dark side of digital transformation. It's a bit of cloud hacking with Ashish Rajan. He's been a speaker in this very room a few months back and runs something called the Cloud Security Podcast. Go check that out. So he's going to be giving us a demonstration of how to hack cloud, specifically AWS. Apologies to AWS. Other clouds are available. And afterwards, we're going to have a little bit of a chit chat with him. The session just before us is a fireside chat with Kelsey Hightower, if you're aware of him. He's also very prominent in terms of Kubernetes and security. So come along. There's going to be a lot of very important speakers there. Additionally, we're doing 2 in 1 month. Crazy. Want to do October 25th?
Yeah, so October 25th, we've got Paul. Paul is going to be talking about IAM. So Paul is here. Oh, there he is.
You can introduce.
Do you want to talk about what you're going to be talking about?
Yes, I'll be talking about my own experiences in attempting to improve identity and access management in various companies. And there will be quite a few takeaways of easy things, well, not necessarily easy, straightforward things that you can do in your own organizations as well. So very much cloud focused. How can you improve cloud identity and access management? Looking forward to seeing you there. And demos, there'll be demos.
Thank you, Paul.
Amazing. All right. Introduce our main speaker, client.
Well, I guess he needs no introduction. He's
Yeah.
already got it. But Ryan, he works at Veracode. I reached out to Michael a few months ago and said, look, we've got our anniversary event. It'd be really good if we could have a special event. I'm very much aware, Ryan, you did a talk many years ago on something which piqued my interest. And I reached out to Michael, and Michael obviously got in touch with Ryan, and Ryan is here tonight to give a talk. So, no further ado, Ryan.
All right. Big round of applause for Ryan. Thank you.
And
Oh, hold on. We didn't do this.
we got another, just before Ryan starts while he's getting set up there, Michael's got something he wants to share with us. Or share with you guys, actually. We can't do anything.
The orders of the slides. It's fine. Okay, so for tonight, we are offering, we as in Veracode are offering a number of prizes. So the top prize is what I'm calling a all-inclusive conference package. So the conference is called NDC Porto in Portugal. So we'll fly you out there. You attend the conference, 3-day conference, and we'll put you up in a hotel for 4 nights to stay over there. To win, you each have a card, I believe. There's a QR code at the back. That will take you to a registration page where obviously we need your contact details, right? Because if you're the winner, you want to know, we need to book the travels and whatnot. The quiz is 3 questions. There's going to be a question about the talk, so pay attention to Ryan. There's going to be a question about the meetup, and then there's going to be a question about Veracode. Now, you guys have got up to midnight to enter, and then we'll do the prize draw tomorrow morning. I'll record it and then publish it on social, LinkedIn. That's my thing. And then obviously I would need to contact the winner to coordinate the travel details, hopefully that afternoon. So that's the top prize. We are also offering 2 other prizes. So Oculus VR headsets, they're at the back over there. To qualify to win those, you need to find me, grab a t-shirt, take a picture, make a LinkedIn post, and tag DevSecOps London Gathering, Michael Mann, Veracode, and then towards the end of tonight, we'll do a draw on screen to see who wins those 2 headsets. So apologies for that being a bit cumbersome, but essentially tag the meetup, the company, and me. But essentially find me, and I'll give you the instructions. Okay.
Just one caveat for the big prize for the conference package. It takes place on the 16th to 20th of October. You must be available to fly on those dates. So that's the only condition. So please don't enter if you cannot make it on those dates.
And what's the conference actually about? What is NDC?
So NDC is a development-centric conference. There'll be lots of talks around software development, security, etc. It's that sort of thing.
Is it National DevOps Conference?
No, that's something else. No, so NDC Oslo originally focused on .NET, but that's just one type of conference, and they've evolved. And then there's NDC London, NDC Security, NDC Porto. So this is the closest one in terms of date. NDC London and Security are early next year. So those are other conferences to look out for if you're
So it
interested.
doesn't stand for national demo.
Does it? Okay,
It-
okay.
It's just, there's one in London, one in Oslo, and one. in Brussels.
Right.
Yeah, cool.
Okay. Any questions? Come and find me.
And I guess it's also worth mentioning, we've got a raffle. Everybody got a raffle ticket tonight. We're going to be drawing a raffle after Ryan has spoken, with a great chance to win some speakers, Randy, JVC speakers, and some hoodies and some t-shirts. So please stick around, and we'll be doing a draw on that later. Now, we have Ryan. So no further ado, Ryan. Give a great big welcome to Ryan, and I'll hand over to you.
All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, so they told me I could do 3 hours tonight, not no.
Your office.
Yeah, so as I said, I'm Ryan O'Boyle. I'm the Director of Product Security here at Veracode. And it seemed like a good combination of, on the 6th anniversary here, a chance to sort of recap what I've been doing at Veracode for over a decade now. This summer, I celebrated my 12th anniversary at Veracode. And for a good 10 years of that, I've been doing product security. So it's been quite the journey, going from when it was just me doing product security to now when we have a more established team and a security champions program, and we've done a lot. And it's interesting because supporting a team today compared to what it was 10 years ago has changed a lot over time, and it really takes a different mindset. And it's important because if you're not being adaptable and building your security program the right way, you really risk building a program that's going to be in conflict with what your development teams are trying to do. And it's going to introduce friction and just make it more challenging to accomplish that shared goal that we in security have with development of shipping a product as securely as we can. So keep in mind, as I'm going through these sort of like greatest hits of the past 10 years, that what I'm mostly here to talk about are the guiding principles that have evolved in our program over that time. And I'm going to share milestones and examples of things that we've done. But the goal isn't for you to go off and do the exact same thing. The goal is to keep in mind these principles that have helped us to succeed in this program over that time, to build a stronger program, to make sure you've got a good relationship with your development teams, and ultimately to accomplish that goal of shipping more secure software. So first sort of guiding principle that we have in our program is learn development's language. You can't work together and you can't secure something that you don't understand, right? Whether that's if you're working on threat modeling, who here thinks they could do a wonderful threat model of something that they don't fully understand?
Can't work together.
Right, and that goes from the technical perspective, whether it's a language or a framework or a new tool that the teams are using, or through processes, through anything that the dev team is doing. If you're going to really partner with them and help them to secure or ensure security is part of that, you need to be able to understand that and speak the same language as them. So sometimes it also means using the same tools, meeting them on the same technologies that they're using. But one of my favorite examples from my time is more about process. And going back to starting around 12 years ago is when Veracode really started adopting agile development processes and using Scrum for the first time. And this was a point in our company where we were transitioning from being a single product team or a single product company to a multiple product company. We really had one large team working on that product. Now we were going to, in some cases, 3 teams all working on that one product, as well as additional teams working on other products. So development recognized that they they needed to mature the process they were doing. They needed to find ways to move faster, to ship the products faster. And that put the challenge to us to figure out, me at the time, of how to keep up with this new pace of what they were doing. There wasn't just one team for me to interface with anymore, right? There was at least 4 teams that I had to stay informed about everything that they're doing and how they're doing it. So we got together and we figured out, like, okay, let's just sort of build on what we were doing. And all these different teams, they're all going to have a planning session. They're going through all the Scrum rituals. And at the start of every sprint, they're going to have a planning session. Let's get together and have the same sort of conversation that we were having all along about, okay, what are you doing? What are some of the security ramifications? What are some of the security criteria that we need to keep in mind? Do we need to make sure this gets a static analysis scan, a code review by me, or a pen test, like a one-off pen test? And to use fancy terms, now we'd call that security acceptance criteria that we were defining on the story. And so we went down that path of incorporating that, and we found that sometimes the security work wasn't getting done. Sometimes the story that they committed to was carrying over into the next sprint. They were throwing off their velocity by things not getting finished. And it wasn't until I had the opportunity to attend one of the training sessions that the company was doing for development teams to learn about Scrum. And I actually went through the Scrum Master training that some of our team members were going through to become Scrum Masters. And it really was an example of that. It's hard to incorporate security into this until I really understood it. And not just the how, not just okay, they're meeting once a week, but the why and what the process was supposed to be. And I had that like aha moment during that training where they were explaining, like, by the time you get to planning, this story is supposed to be completely groomed, right? The criteria of what the team is committing to is supposed to be done before they commit to it. It sounds obvious when you say it like that, right? And we were by definition breaking that process every week. So I was attending these planning meetings, these long planning meetings across multiple teams, spending a lot of my time and doing it in a way that went against what we were trying to accomplish. So we came back from that and we're able to sort of reevaluate and say, okay, we're not doing this at the right point. Teams aren't getting a chance to accurately size and commit to something that covers all aspects, that covers not just the testing for functionality that they need to do, performance testing, any others, but that really has already defined what the security criteria are going to be. And then we found some teams were doing grooming already and doing it very well, and it was easy to just plug into that. But this also helped highlight that some teams weren't being as strict about grooming. Maybe their product owner was kind of just doing it themselves without bringing in other voices, other stakeholders around the criteria. So it helped us figure out the right way to plug into that process. It got me out of 8 hours of meetings a week to maybe 2 hours of just doing grooming, which was that was a nice surprise. And it helped. It helped the process. We saw that we weren't seeing stories carried over. It wasn't so much of a surprise when we would add criteria at that point. So I think that one of the important aspects there is to keep in mind on the security side, stay in the loop with what's happening, with what processes, with what technologies, and keep in mind the trainings, because that's one constant, is the development teams are going to continue to look for ways to improve their processes, and they're going to use some sort of resources, whether they're going to buy a book for everyone or they're going to do on-site training or send people off. On the dev side, if anyone here is a dev manager, remember to reach out to the security team and say, hey, this is what we're going to do now. We want you involved. And on the security side, don't assume that they're going to do that. Keep paying attention and check in, because since then we've gone through multiple iterations where we've gone from teams individually doing Scrum to some smaller teams just using a Kanban style, and we had to reevaluate, well, how do we do that? Then we, for a while, moved to what's called the Scaled Agile Framework, or SAFe, which was a way of getting everybody together in a room. This was pre-COVID. Everybody from around the planet coming together to plan through the next PI, which was like basically a quarter's worth of work. And we knew from there, okay, as soon as development's changing their process, bring in this new thing. I went to the training, find out, well, okay, what's this whole SAFe process? It wasn't defined how to integrate security into it. We figured out how to do that. And since then, we've gone through even more iterations. So number 2, secure the path of least resistance. So make it easier for developers, make it easier for them to do the secure thing than to do the not secure thing. Or another way, some organizations refer to, you can think of this as just security by default. Some organizations call it the paved road. Another way to think of it is leaning into the idea that in the development space, laziness is considered a virtue, right? If you can solve the problem for them and they don't have to, that helps speed them up. And they will be open to that idea as long as you're not making their life more difficult. If you're making things easier for them and security comes along for the ride, that's frequently win-win for them. This is one that I like to give a physical example of this idea in action, right? So this is like the evolution of car keys over time. It used to be when they first introduced, locking cars, you had to have your key, get out of the car, lock it, and take off. Then over time, it gets easier to do. You don't have to turn around and lock it anymore. You just start walking away, press the button. If you're like me, you get up to where you're going, the entrance of the building, start second guessing if you actually locked it, walk back, pressing the button the whole time till you hear the beep again, right? And then we get to like passive. You just have the key fob with you. You walk away, and you just know that your car is locking. Then we get to like, more recent memory with like Bluetooth enabled, and you just have your phone that you're probably not going to forget in the car, or if you do, you're going to go back for it. And you don't even have an extra thing to carry around, right? You just have your phone in your pocket and you just walk away and it locks, right? So this to me is like a good example of that sort of ethos of playing into the easiest thing for someone to do. What they're going to do anyway is get up and walk away from that car. So if you can have security, like locking the door, come along for the ride, that's great. A slightly more relevant example. When we started switching from a monolithic architecture to microservices architecture, we learned the lesson of getting involved early. That's always a good idea. Whenever anything new is starting up, get involved as quick as possible. And it gave us a chance not just to figure out how do we keep up with development in this situation. And we knew there was going to be a scaling problem, right? There's going to be just an influx of the number of applications and code bases that we're going to be dealing with. And there might be a lot of commonality across many of them, but there's still going to be a lot of them. So how do we deal with that? But there was also an opportunity to think about, well, what could we do differently in this architecture that we couldn't do in the old architecture? And so is anyone familiar with the M&M security model? Anyone heard that term before? No. It's pretty old, and I don't know if it was ever intended to be a compliment or not, but the idea is you've got your hard, crunchy outside, and then all the yummy, good stuff inside, right? So it's a very, only the perimeter is hardened approach to security, or sometimes it was called like the moat style security. So we thought of, well, we weren't trying to do that model because we always consider defense in depth, even with our monolithic architecture. But this move to many individual pieces seemed like an opportunity to bring in what I called the grape nuts security model, which, okay, maybe grape nuts are a thing here for at least one person. Are they? Do you have grape nuts in the UK?
Not for a very long time. They
No.
tried and failed.
Okay, right. They failed because they're not very good. They're
Yeah.
right. They're just small, crunchy, hard, unappetizing bits of something, right? Which sounds great from a security perspective, right? Unappetizing, hard to extract the value, everything's hardened, right? So you might hear this more formally called like a zero trust model these days. But fiber model. Right. So this is how we considered this. So, okay, we're going to move to this more, we're going to have every function in the system now. It's probably going to have like a micro UI. It's going to have at least one microservice that's responsible for its own data management. There's going to be shared services that provide functionality to everything. We want each one of those to be held to the same standard that we would hold a monolithic application to. We want them all to be scanned. We want them all to be concerned about encryption of data at rest, encryption of data in transit. And we're able to really define, okay, as part of this new architecture, what do we want the security model to be? And from there, we could get involved as the first team that went down this path and figured out what does a microservice at Veracode look like. We worked with that team and figured out, well, what does the security posture of a microservice at Veracode look like as well? And one of the things that team was tasked with doing was not just, well, go make a microservice. They were tasked with enablement for the whole company to start moving to that model. So they were doing a lot of defining templates, defining how the CI/CD approach was going to work, defining what metrics we're going to track. There was a lot that they were tasked with in terms of preparing the organization for that. And we made security a part of that. So as we solve problems with this one team, like, well, how is authentication going to work between microservices? We solved that problem once, and we're able to bake that into the designs and into the templates that team then produced and evangelized out to all of the other teams. And they became sort of an extension of the security team as being like subject matter experts for the way they had implemented the solutions to some of these problems. So that's where we got to things like mutual authentication just being a standard part of our design there. And at the end of the day, security wasn't saying there's only one way to do mutual authentication. We were saying all of these components must have mutual authentication, but it turned out that the easy way was for new teams to just start with what this team had already built and use the same model for mutual authentication that was already there from day one for them. Something else that came out of that time frame is what we call VSSL, the Veracode Standard Security Libraries. This was, again, that same idea of let's solve this problem once and make it available to as many people in the company that might benefit from that as possible. So these are internal open source libraries. A lot of them are nothing particularly fancy, like security logging Java. You can probably guess what that does and what language it's in. And really its primary concern is just preventing CRLF injection. And it's really just a wrapper around like SLF for J. So it's just a log for J, dare I say that? A log for J interface that takes care of CRLF sanitization issues. So it's really easy for anyone internally who's using Java to just include this. If we're doing a security review of a new project and we're going through our checklist of all the security controls and threats we want to talk about, and then we say, are you using Secure Logger? They answer yes. We know that they're using an implementation that we're familiar with and that we know addresses the problem to the standard we want it to be. And only if they're doing something different, if they're working in a language we don't have a solution for that, or they're using some library we're not familiar with, then we're going to have to do some more investigation before they're unblocked.
Were these built by your team or were these built by the teams that use this?
Yeah, they are. So my team does contribute code to them. But at the end of the day, we are really more of like the steward or like the maintainer of the library than the primary developers. From the start, they've been a shared, they really have been a shared component that both the security team and the development teams are responsible for. So there's some that the product security team is the primary author on most of the code in there. There's others like our validation library in Java. That's probably kind of 50-50. Like we were involved in defining how the validation works, but we had someone from development on that initial microservices team work a lot with like, well, how are they going to actually use this in the code, in their controllers and elsewhere? So that one was a very shared approach. And we do treat them as like internal open source. So any developer that wants to make a contribution, they can fork it, they can open up a merge request to bring that code back. But we have a pretty strict security review process for them. And that's also both ways. If the security team wants to make updates to it, we also can't do that without someone from development approving the merge request as well, because we don't want to go in and like, oh, we're going to fix this thing that we see as a bug, but it turns out it's going to like derail the performance of the check it's doing or something, right? So we always make sure for actual code changes that development is still involved. And then from there, in addition to having these available, they also became a part of the microservices templates that team was building. So they made a thing called service base that was sort of the starting point for a lot of new microservices. In addition to the functionality it gave for how to like quickly create your REST API and everything else, it also had our validation library in there. So you could very quickly and easily validate standard formats or standard data types that we had defined in one place at Veracode. Another example from the same time frame is Buildbox, which so this was in sort of the early days of us bringing in Docker at all. So we weren't even talking about like deploying to production on something like Docker or these days Kubernetes, but even just running builds with our CI/CD system. And can we build software on containers? And if so, do we want our dev teams just building on arbitrary containers from Docker Hub that yes, it's got like the JDK on there and that's all taken care of for you, but who knows what else is on there? We didn't. So, and at the time, there weren't a lot of great options for how to limit access to Docker Hub and restrict it to, I'm not sure that the idea of an official image even existed at that point. So we had to figure out, well, what can we do that we can partner with this team, that we can make sure something that we feel we've got a high degree of trust in is not only available to these teams, but actually valuable for them to use. And that's where this idea of Buildbox came in, that we built together with that team. So these were Docker images that were built internally and hosted internally. And there was a hardened operating system at the core of it. And then these sort of nesting doll layers where each layer added something more. So if layer 0 is just that hardened image, layer 1 added like a JDK. Layer 2 added Gradle, I want to say. This is probably right. Maybe not. No. Yeah. So, added like a JDK. The next version would have Gradle. The next layer would add Python. The next layer might add some AWS, and then there'd be some team specific layers after that. But it meant that teams had an option that they knew they didn't have to figure anything out about this new Docker thing. Like that was definitely coming for them to learn about eventually, but for the time being, they just wanted their build to succeed in the new build environment, and they could do that. They knew that if they pinned it, if they had the right version of this that corresponded to the version they were trying to build for, this was there, it was going to work for them, it was available, and they also knew it was already blessed by security. So it was very easy to get teams up and running on using that. And so again, like another common thread across all of these of looking for the opportunities to make things secure by default is doing that early. So being very aware of what are the new things that the development organization is getting ready to do, and partnering with them to figure out how to do that securely from the start. And then you also get to piggyback on all of the enablement that they're going to do for the rest of the organization about how to do this. So Next one, I'm going to ask a question before we get into it. So probably all familiar with the idea of if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? But so my question to you is, if a security engineer spends 2 weeks building a fantastic dashboard about security debt and no developer ever looks at it, have they accomplished anything for the security program? Yes, no. Any goes, no.
Difference between philosophical and practical.
Yeah. So this is our third one. Put security where the developers already are. And this again, this is a very broad sort of principle to keep in mind. Think about what are developers already looking at every day? What are developers, where are they getting their work from? Where are they getting the prioritization of work from? Where are they getting guidance from? Are they given internal Slack or Teams chat or IRC still around? Like, where are they getting that from? If they're not getting it from those internal things, are they getting it from Stack Overflow, ChatGPT, or for those internal ones, that's a place you can go to. For the external ones, you're gonna have to. I can't offer you any solutions today for that, but you need to know where they're getting that so you can respond to it, and ideally be a part of the conversation wherever they are doing that. One sort of sidebar on that is the idea of a security champion. To me, there's no better way to make sure that you're putting security everywhere your developers are than by turning some of your developers into security champions. And then by definition, they are everywhere that developers are. We first started our security champion program back in 2014. And the real idea behind it was that it was really win-win-win, because for the development team, they were very concerned with moving faster at that time. And the security champions program was going to help them to eliminate dependencies on an externality to the team. So they would be able to move faster by being more self-sufficient if they had some level of security expertise on the team. From my perspective on running a security team, it was a way to scale the program. It was a way to get commitment from those teams that in exchange for us becoming less of a bottleneck for them, they were making more of the time for members of that team available to me to help accomplish some of my goals and some of the security concerns we had. And then for those developers, it was also a win, because even if they've been working in development for 20 years, they might not have ever really had a chance to learn much about security, or some of the things that we've done with them. We've done like internal CTF competitions, either largely using things that are just available on the internet, like Over the Wire and some other challenges. We've sent them to security conferences. It's easy when we're in the Boston area, so if there's a local security conference, we've been able to send like large groups of them at different points to those. We've even sent a couple out to to Black Hat in Vegas, and we even had one security champion who wanted to take the OSCP. So we did all that out of our security training budget, not out of their development budget. So it really was a way that the teams could become more self-sufficient. We could scale the security team in a way, and the developers themselves get something out of it. And one thing that we did that I think is a little bit different is we never viewed security champions as just a liaison to the security team. Like, they were that, but I think that's been a pretty common definition of what a security champion is. It's someone who isn't necessarily tasked with learning about security or advocating for it, but they're just the one who's supposed to know how to talk to security. And we have always acknowledged that as part of it. And we've said, like, if nothing else, the security champion should be the security conscience of the team, so that at least someone in all those meetings or whatever they're doing is at least raising the question of, like, oh, we've talked about the functional concerns, we've talked about performance, what about security? And even if they can't answer that question, maybe that's a sign to say, well, maybe we should talk to someone from the security team and find out. But we've also always hoped that that they would have a chance to move beyond that and actually become sort of a first level security expert, which really feeds into the idea of being able to understand something helps you to secure it. So, I mean, we had some security champions that were such experts in what they were working on day to day that they would find security problems I couldn't find because I wasn't an expert in that particular language. So there's this weird edge case where this version does whatever that I have no idea, but Michael does. So great. Was that the question?
How long did it take you to form the champions, and how long after did it take you to get return on your investment?
I'd say it went pretty quick because we started it off. We started it off as not strictly a volunteer position. It was a volunteer position, but there was also a voluntold element where we did talk with the engineering managers because we started off by getting buy-in from them about we're going to try this new thing. Here's what's in it for you. We talked about things like the training budget and the becoming less dependent on us. So we kind of had buy-in from everyone involved going into it. And then we kicked right off with doing some like CTF-based training, some of our own e-learning stuff that we had access to, and sort of ramped up that first group very quickly. Then as it was successful, that was one of the things that was interesting actually over the years is what happens when that becomes successful. Because we did find as time went on that in certain teams, we got to the point where everybody on the team was a security champion, which kind of led to this almost bystander effect. And it's kind of like if everyone on the team is a security champion, then no one on the team is the security champion. And so actually recently, within the past year or so, we've introduced a new role called the security maven. And the idea there is that while the security of the product is still a shared responsibility for the whole team, we have a single point, a single person on the team who is accountable for the security of it. So it's still shared responsibility, but singular accountability. And that was interesting because it was definitely a shift. When we started, our goal was explicitly to have at least 2 security champions on every team because we didn't want a single point of failure. We wanted to make sure that if someone was on leave or someone changed teams or someone left the company, like we didn't want the team to then be without one. So we tried to build in redundancy. And then it was as things matured that we found like, okay, there's actually a flip side of that where now if a security issue comes up and I'm going to go talk to the security champion about it, well, who do I talk to? Do I interrupt the whole team? There's not one person for me to go interrupt because this is like a product security incident and I need to talk to someone. It just like led to that, like, well, now by definition, if I'm talking to the security champion, it means I'm talking to everyone on the team and I'm interrupting the whole team instead of the one person who's supposed to be accountable. And so again, that idea of being accountable doesn't mean that they're the only one responsible for doing the security work. If it's a really small team, then maybe it is that the security maven is the one person who's doing most of the, whether it's scanning or proposing mitigations or threat modeling or whatever it is they're working on. It may just be them, but it doesn't have to be. If it's a bigger team and they have, we still have the idea of security champion, but it's more open. We used to have some guidelines around who was a good fit for that program. Now it's open. They still meet monthly, as opposed to mavens meet weekly with us. But they're welcome to join. Like anybody who wants to. If they're a junior developer, it's their first week at Veracode, they can join that meeting and start learning about security. And they can be a resource for the maven on their team to help accomplish what they're responsible for. But they're not the one that we're going to try to make sure this is like on their goal plan to make sure that someone's paying attention to those aspects of the product. So again, security maven, the idea was increased accountability for that one person while still having a shared responsibility for the team.
The eligibility would be one who's actually was there an eligibility for that name?
There is, yeah. We have the idea on our dev teams of an anchor, who's someone who is more on the senior side, not a junior developer. They're a little more senior. They're going to work with like their PM, with the architect that works with their team. At the end of the day, when it comes to how things are getting implemented, they can be a decision maker. And we really tried to pattern this off of that idea. If I was going back, I probably would call this role security anchor. There was some concern of overlapping the terms there, being confusing, but it is like we want it's got to be someone on the team who is well positioned to actually make sure that these things are happening on the team. It can't be someone who's very junior and isn't familiar with the processes or is still ramping up on the technology and like the code base, right? It's got to be someone who's established on that team and is going to be able to either do this stuff efficiently themselves or for a bigger team, coordinate the others on the team and make sure it's happening.
I mean, in that case, like the responsibilities, as you said, it's more accountable. So will he be able to balance with his primary job role?
Yeah, I mean, that's where we tried not to define it too much for them. We wanted to make it clear, here's the expectations of what you need to be considering and doing for your product, without dictating this is how you should do it, which was something we were kind of doing with security champions. We were saying every security champion needs to go through our security code review training so that they can do that for their team. With the Maven, we've made it a little bit more open-ended so that they can customize it. If they're going to be better suited with their team dynamic to be delegating and more facilitating and making sure that the team is doing the security processes they should be, that's fine as long as it's getting done. Or if it's if they work with their manager and their capacity and they say, look, it makes the most sense for me to just always be the one that updates our threat model or reviews our findings and proposes mitigations or whatever it is, they can do that. And then it's up to them to negotiate with their manager to say how much capacity do they need on the team to spend doing that. So we really wanted to make it flexible for them. This is still, this is relatively new in the scope of this. So like we're still working through. Some of our more recent feedback has been around threat modeling, and we're trying to figure out the right balance between like a security maven versus their architect when it comes to things like doing an initial threat model of their design versus the implementation later on. So, yeah.
If you're making this role open-ended, and in fact, even going back to when it was just the security champions, how do you then ensure that the things that you need doing and that you think are being done actually are being done? Are your team doing any auditing of what these champions and mavens are supposed to be doing?
Yeah. So in terms of looking for metrics and evidence that these things are actually happening, that's always been a consideration, even going back to the early days of the Security Champions program. Was, as we tasked them with things like security code reviews, we had a process for making sure we could find those. And if we found that they weren't happening, figuring out why. Is it because they're not due?
Not just about whether these things were happening, but whether they're happening to the quality that you require.
Yeah. We are still pretty cognizant of what we ask them to do. So sometimes it's very straightforward. Like you need to make sure that all of your CI/CD pipelines have the right AppSec scanning in there, right? And then so we have stats to see if that's happening. Like every mitigation for an AppSec finding that gets proposed, my team still reviews those. We've done a lot to enable the mavens or someone on their team to propose those as easily and accurately as possible, but the actual approval still comes to us. So with each thing, and we do want to get to a more, severity-based, decentralized approach to something like that. But we talk exactly about that, of how are we going to make sure we scope it so that maybe something that's like a very low severity or low severity, the maven can actually sign off and accept the risk on that, but nothing above. So make sure that we're not setting themselves up to do something they shouldn't. We want to make sure we're supporting them, and then also that we have the capability to sort of audit that and go back and look over time and say, like, okay, so we can see someone did approve this, and sort of spot check and say, is this something we would have? And that's been good, because it's moving towards that as one of our future goals has meant that we also had to define some of that for ourselves, which means as someone new comes onto our team and we want them to do mitigation review, we've got, looking at Tanuja in the audience who works on this every day, yeah, right? She's been documenting every time we see a new pattern of something that's a really common issue, and there's a really calculated, easy way to confirm, okay, this isn't really something we need to track. We're going to be okay with approving this every time as long as X, Y, and Z are met. So documenting that means we're well suited to eventually let the mavens do that, because the process is very clear. It's scoped only to like this particular CWE or this particular CVE in a component. And it also makes it easier on our team to bring up new people that are doing that for us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And a little bit more towards that same thought, shifting away from the people, but more again with this idea of going to where developers are. That's been a big consideration of our approach to scanning in CI/CD pipelines. Developers, they're spending, or hopefully anyway, they're spending most of their day developing. And I think if you talk to most of them about like what do they want to spend most of their day doing, it's also developing, right? That's what they want to do. So when you come in with security work that isn't about helping them develop securely, but instead is about facilitating like security scans, like that's not really something that they're interested in. So we've made it a point to introduce tools that are easy for them to drop in and easy for them to stay focused on what they do best and what they want to be doing, which is developing, by building things ourselves using the tools that they use. So we're going to where they already are in terms of tooling. We're writing it in languages that are familiar with them, and that same sort of speak their language approach. And so like one of our early examples of this was something called Policy Hawk. So this was in a very early iteration of our like CI/CD system that we're using today. We weren't doing a lot of the scanning from that. Well, we were doing scanning from that, but we were doing it in a very piecemeal fashion, where there was a lot of copy pasta of we wrote a job of how to do a scan, and that got copied and pasted all over from one project to another, from one group to another. And this was our first step towards trying to reel that into a more unified and templated approach. And this is what we called Policy Hawk, which was just we use GitLab. So this was a GitLab job template that could break your build on sort of 3 different criteria. One was based on if there were any findings that were net new from a certain date, or this is what I would call stop the bleeding mode, right? So we know we have security debt in this project. We're working on trying to get that prioritized, but can we at least stop introducing new stuff today? So you could add Policy Hawk to your pipeline. You could configure the date in an environment variable to be today's date. And any scan that happens that introduces something new past that date is now going to break your build. Another approach was severity based. So again, maybe the date control isn't the main thing, but we wanted to, by default, just high and above. You can't do anything if you've got a high or above finding. And then you could also ratchet that down, that then if you were progressing through your security debt and you closed out all your mediums, well, now you could set that so that medium or above is going to break the build. But it was still very much focused. And then the third mode was full policy compliance. So our policies are always that all security issues must be fixed or otherwise addressed. They must be mitigated somehow. The difference is how much time the team is given to do that. But again, this approach, Policy Hawk, this really was just checking for good security scanning hygiene, and for these different criteria, it wasn't actually doing the scans itself, but it was really successful as a new approach of like a centralized template that development teams could introduce into their pipeline with like a single include. All they had to do was like include one file and like set the job or set the stage that this is supposed to run at. And that was really it. And we got some really good feedback from the teams here. So this is one of our developers at the time saying, hey, you know, we put Policy Hawk in, started off and like everything was green, and then it failed, and it helped alert them to the fact that they had a scanning problem at some point in the past, and help them detect a problem that was going to have the potential to be sort of a cascading failure and start introducing issues that they weren't aware of for some time. Another thing that was really great feedback was when the same developer went to go look at what was going down, they proactively found my repo where all this stuff was. They were very, very pleased to find out that it was all just like a self-contained bash script. So again, like it was in a language. We didn't pick, I could have done it all in Ruby, and there's probably 0 other people in Veracode who would have been happy to come across that Ruby code, right? But we did it intentionally in a language that was not only developer friendly, but actually fairly universal and still well suited for the job. So he was able to go see what was happening right there. And we've had developers contribute bug fixes and improvements to a template like this as a result as well, because they had ran into a problem, they figured out what it is, they went and fixed it. Then from there, we iterated and started making more GitLab templates, not just for these sort of simple checks, but also for like, how do you actually run the scans? So if you want to run a Veracode policy scan or a pipeline scan or agent-based SCA scan, like we have templates that we use internally for teams to be able to do that. And again, like they don't, just because you're working at Veracode doesn't mean you know anything about how to run a pipeline scan at Veracode, right? If you're working on that, yeah, and they've been running pipeline scan in their pipelines since the very start. But if you're working on our dynamic product, pipeline scan is really out of your perspective. So you've got the same concern any other developer would have, which is, I just want to run this. I don't want to spend a bunch of time setting up this tool. Just make it work for me as easily as possible. And that's what these templates enable. They can just include the template. They still have to figure out the right place in their pipelines for the job to run. And we have different flavors of every template. We've got what I call like the dev mode, which is it runs in an informational capacity. It reports on issues of any severity, but it doesn't break your build. It's just there to make sure you know what's coming when you get into later phases of the development process. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have the release versions of those jobs, which will break your build. And by default, they'll break them based on severity. But so the idea is you include this file once, you drop a job somewhere early in your pipeline, and you drop the release version of the job somewhere late, like around the time that you'd be building a release candidate, or possibly when you're actually going to do like a deployment. And any configuration you have to do is really just by setting a couple environment variables. You have to have credentials set up that are scoped to your team. And for most of them, not even all of them, but for like a policy scan or a pipeline scan, you have to set an environment variable that tells our script what to scan. But you don't have to understand anything about the way the scan happens or what to do with the findings. That all just happens. All they have to figure out is the logic of their pipeline of when this stuff should happen. And this was interesting too, because as we're going down that path of building this for them, we found that packaging up our own tools into Docker images was actually really handy to suit this process, because we were making these jobs into pretty much just a black box that they would pass a binary into, and we would handle everything else about getting that binary scanned and making sure the results went where they should, or the job failed if it's supposed to. And to keep things simple, we didn't want to try to write our stuff so that it would run on every last Docker image, build box or anything official that they might be using now. So we started building some minimal Docker images that have our own like publicly available integrations for doing this stuff for these jobs, which then actually eventually became the Veracode public Docker images that you can go out to Docker Hub and use today. So this was really a great example of us building something to enable our developers that then not only was good for our developers, but was good for our customers, and something that we can make available to them as well. So it's really been interesting from that perspective too, to start sharing things outwardly that are useful. These then, we were using GitLab, but then these same images then became the foundation for some of our GitHub integrations and some of our other integrations out there for different systems, where they're able to just use those same images that are minimal, packaged up just with what you need to get that scan done. Another little one that is nothing that crazy, but at Veracode with our scans, we have this idea of passing policy. So that's where we enforce what types of scans have to run, what severity flaws must be fixed, and how quick must they be. And in one of our Veracode hackathons, I worked with one of our UI designers to come up with badges, like CI/CD pipeline badges, that we could put on our internal projects to show the current policy status. And so worked with her. She did some of the design for what should these look like. I did the technical part of hitting the Veracode platform and generating these. And as a starting point, those same VSSL libraries that we use, they become kind of a test ground for a lot of stuff that we're doing. We're responsible for maintaining the CI/CD on those. So whenever we have an idea of what we think the next generation of this should look like, or we're rolling out something new like pipeline scan or agent-based SCA scan, something new that we're doing, we're always eager to adopt those. And our first targets are always the VSSL libraries that we maintain. So we put those out on the VSSL library. And very soon after, again, had a developer on our internal chat just come across it when he was looking at that project for some reason. I said, what is this badge and how can I get that on my project? Right. So this is, that was a great thing to see. A developer just reaching out and saying, hey, you did this security thing on the security libraries. I want to see that on my project too. That was great validation that we were moving in the direction of building something that resonated with developers, that was going to be visible in a place that they wanted to be, that they wanted to see this information. They're telling me I can't do 3 hours after. Yeah. Right. So yeah, this was great feedback. So last couple of points. So this is kind of what all of this stuff over this 10-year period. This is sort of one way of viewing all of it. This is sort of the mode we have of these 4 phases, phase 0 being before code. That's when all the things around templates and security champions and security training and all that stuff happens. It's all happening before anyone even starts writing code. But then the scanning piece of it happens during these other 3 phases of my code, when the developer is working in their IDE on their stuff, and then moving through that process. Again, they have a process, they have a way of doing this, and we've just figured out how to incorporate different types of scanning into that process over time. And, we've got it end to end. We call it customer 01. It's our internal name for this. And I think it was in 2022 when we introduced on the Veracode platform a peer benchmarking capability, which was really cool. Like it was a way for customers to see how are they doing in a couple different metrics compared to all other Veracode customers or to Veracode customers that are similar, either in the same field or similar size. And I was very interested to see that for our program as well, because we are an internal customer, but we are still a customer. And I was really pleased to see when we were able to look at that, it was a nice validation that this approach was working, because from day one, when we introduced peer benchmarking, all 4 metrics we were beating. We were beating both Veracode customers overall, and we were beating like technology companies with 100+ app. And so those are things like the mean time to resolve issues, the number of apps that have a flaw at all, the number of apps that have a high severity flaw, and one that I really was pleased to see was the fix rate. Like we've had a fix rate of over 90% ever since we started having access to that data. So it was really great validation of how we're doing by incorporating all of these aspects into our program against that sample set. So that was everything. So again, to recap, like those sort of guiding principles for us are learning development's language, securing the path of least resistance, and then finally putting security where developers already. If there's any questions that you really urgently want to hear, we can cover. Otherwise, maybe we'll chat afterwards.
Quick, sure. How do you pass the metadata about what scans and things have been completed and passed to your security fork? I think you called it. No.
Policy. Yeah, PolicyHawk. This is very much tied to the Veracode platform. So the Veracode platform is the canonical source of truth for those scans, because the scans are happening in the cloud. So we would know the context from the pipeline. We would know what application it is, and we would reach out to the Veracode platform to get the sort of definitive answer there. So for some of our newer products that are a little more ephemeral, we're building something now to help sort of aggregate that, because it's not something that like the build system makes really easy for us to do. So we are figuring some new stuff out around that as well.
Let's go back to the previous slide, please. So what's the difference between my code and our code?
Yeah, my code. So my code is the phase when the developer is working on stuff in their IDE, and they don't think they're ready for peer review yet. That's probably the easiest way to say it. Once the real transition to go from my code to our code is that the developer is going to open up a merge request or a pull request. They're going to say, I've been working off on this branch, and I think it's ready to go back into the shared code base.
Okay, so my code is when they're looking at developing something as an individual. Our code is when they share it with the wider team.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Question. Thanks, Ryan. One question I want to ask, right? So you are a security company, and you are the head of product security for a security company. So $1 million question: do you test your own product with the pipeline that you just described? And most importantly, I know Veracode also has a lot of open source packages available out there. Do you test open source? Because I've spoken to one of your competitors, which is, let's say, top 4 of people that they got this magic quadrant, and they said, yeah, we do it. And I show them a scan, because obviously I could pull the source code from GitHub and scan with their own product, and it found like hundreds of hive, and they were all true positives. Not all, but let's say a lot of them were true positives. Yeah, so is there, because of security challenge, this is all great, but is there a culture of we should drink our own champagne, eat our own dog food, whatever? So we say, is everything getting scanned with your own product?
Yep. Yeah. So that is, we actually used to call this part of our AppSec program Purina because of dog food. We changed it to customer 01 to be a little more appetizing, a little more on brand. But yes, like this is the process that we use We do take the risk profile of a component into account. So any production shipping software is going to be held to this standard versus an internal tool that's written to do a data migration once. We actually do still require them to scan it, but not under the same policy that their like production shipping code is going to be scanned by. Same thing, third-party components, like if we have something that's like commercial off-the-shelf software that we're running in our environment, we still require that to be scanned. Not necessarily for first-party code issues, but for third-party stuff, so that in the event of a supply chain issue or new CVE, we still have an inventory of, okay, what open source components is that application that we're not developing, but we're hosting. We can still go and see side by side with the stuff we are developing. Okay, we think this one has that issue. We need to talk to that vendor and find out what's their plan for giving us a patch. So we absolutely do. This is a part of all of it. Yeah.
Hi. So you covered a lot about automation, security tools in the pipeline, which is great, pretty much what I expected. My question is, what do you do about the other classes of bugs, which are not necessarily discoverable by a tool? For example, stuff like logical bugs, authentication bypass, authorization bypass, race condition, all the other stuff that it's hard to discover in an automated manner.
Yeah, so if you look across sort of like the four buckets of like static versus dynamic and manual versus automated, we do all four. So for the automated scans, we do automated static analysis that's just happening all the time. It's built into all of these templates. We do still do manual static analysis, which is code review. We don't do it on every tiny little thing. We've tried to incorporate security training into the curriculum of our developers so that every peer review that happens is at least partially a security review as well. And then in other circumstances, we will actually elevate that to the point where we have someone from the security team doing a code review. And then on the dynamic side, we run automated dynamic scans of everything on a regular basis. And we do also do manual pen testing. In addition to like overarching once a year minimum pen tests of big swaths of things, we also do manual pen tests of, for example, every new API that gets released. It's a requirement that goes through manual pen testing. We're fortunate to have our own manual pen test team as part of our services organization, so we can sort of just throw that over internally. But so we do that sort of combination of internal risk-based pen testing internally, as well as bringing in the regular external pen tests to help validate and make sure we have a fresh perspective as well.
You want the mic or am I?
Yes, you can hear me.
Yes, for you to. Two questions, if you one is like what didn't work, or like and you fixed it, or what still doesn't work and you're trying to fix it. And the other one is how does like we were all talking about application developers, but infrastructure teams are quite large these days, like people who manage your AWS or Azure or whatnot. Is there much difference between those teams and application teams?
Yeah. So first question, one of my favorite examples of something not working was when we first started going down the path of training security champions to do security code review. We used a similar model for that we had used for how we ramped them up on being able to do security grooming. So as we transitioned that to the champions, we did it sort of in a very like organic mentor-driven approach where they started attending grooming with me and writing up like a guide for their product of like, well, this is how we know which stories need a code review or need whatever. And so that worked really well. So when we went to go do code review, we did the same thing. We started off with, we had them do our e-learning courses around that were relevant. we put together a 2-day in-person training just for them, where we talked about security fundamentals, which, side note, they loved getting like an explanation of just fundamental concepts that security people take for granted, like the CIA triad, and what does defense in depth really mean? What's a trust boundary? They felt like they had never gotten access to that, and they really, really enjoyed getting that and getting those essentials that they could apply to what they're doing. So we went through security fundamentals, five specific security controls that we wanted them, that we thought were well suited for them to look at. So it was, see if I can do it off the top of my head, like logging, parameterization for SQL, encoding. Nope, I can't do it off the top of my head. Answered that question. But we specifically didn't do like crypto. We didn't even do access control. Right? We didn't do authorization and authentication. We wanted it to be very like day-to-day regular things. Oh, data validation. I think I skipped that one. Data validation. Right. So we scoped it to things that would be familiar to them and pretty easy to do. And then we also did a session on threat model. And so that was the first pillar, was the e-learning. The second one was the 2-day training. And the third was that now they had to go do some code reviews, and started them all off on doing that. And then I realized I have to pull the plug on that, because I'm having them do code reviews of real pull requests on real code that fortunately might not actually have any bugs in it, right? Like there's no guarantee that I can't actually validate that they are at a point where they can find security issues the way we're hoping to prove out if I don't know that they're looking at code that has security issues. So we had to totally trash that approach to that sort of like final test, and sign myself up for now coming up with real examples straight from our products, from like past issues, that I could now give them that code as the way that they need to go in and validate that. And then we run into the same types of issues that I think all of you run into with your development teams as well, where every now and then someone goes in and makes it so that a job that's supposed to break the build doesn't break the build anymore, right? And you have to go track down and figure out like, why is this team that was green now red? What's going on? What's broken? So there's also still that same like day-to-day, like someone's credentials expire and they're not paying attention, so things kind of go off the rails for a while, or someone goes in to try to fix something and doesn't realize that they're disabling something. So we definitely run into a lot of those same sort of everyday keeping the program up and running types of issues as well. And your second question.
Infrastructure teams.
Infrastructure teams. Yeah, so we have, so it's kind of interesting, Veracode being Veracode, my whole time I've been part of the research team there. And I think that's a little atypical, is my sense. I think in most organizations, the AppSec program would probably be run out of like the CISO's office. So we have our security team. We have a security operations team that also does like cloud security issues and all that sort of infrastructure security. So they report to our CISO, and they're focused on a lot of the more operational and network level, host level. The place that gets interesting is with things that start to blur the lines, like infrastructure as code, right? So that's something where we really, both teams get pulled into that. Like we've got, infrastructure as code scanning as one of our capabilities now. And as we're introducing that, that's where we have a role to play in it. But then if you start looking at not just are there issues we can find in the definitions there, but does the definition match what's actually in production, or is there drift happening? Has someone gone in and changed things after it's built and deployed? That's where the security operations team has, at the same time that we've had to learn more about some of the infrastructure, they've had to learn more about the product side of things and getting comfortable with some of those formats as well. So we definitely work with them quite a bit, but yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, this will be the last question.
Yeah, hi. So how do you make the information available for developers readily? Like say, for example, the security design check is as per the OWASP, MAS, VS, or the controls. Suppose they are writing their they're coding and they want to consume that information. So how is it centrally available and made easily available to the developers?
Yeah, so we everything that we define for them, like anything around policy or responsibilities or expectations for them, we make sure that we're putting that somewhere that they have access to it. And ideally, we incorporate it right into wherever that stuff is being defined for their other quality concerns, right? So like we have an internal SDLC definition that says this is when someone has an idea, it goes through something called shaping, then it goes through to design and then implementation. And the development organization owns that process, and or not just the product organization owns that and defines all those, what those processes are. And then we always work with them to go put the aspects of that are relevant for security into that. So if there's a place that defines that, like this is where their standards for code coverage of just general functional testing has to be. This is the criteria for their performance testing. We put the security information right there alongside those other ones. Then in terms of like the findings or like what the policies are, we make those available to them like on the wiki to make it really easy for them to see it alongside everything else they're looking at. But then in our security platform, we also have it all set up for them to go there should they choose to. That does tend to run a little bit against the ethos of putting it where developers go. So we don't actually rely on that. We use things like our own Jira flaw importer, that if there are issues that aren't fixed, if something doesn't get fixed during the my code phase and it doesn't get fixed until the point where they're doing like a policy scan late in this process, that's the point where it will actually be logged as a finding, and our importer will create an issue in their Jira backlog to make sure that they're aware of it. So again, everything we do, we're trying to make sure we're putting it somewhere where the developers have access to that information, and they never have to go through us as like as a bottleneck to get access to the stuff that's relevant to them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thanks. If it's a separate portal, like a separate portal, then people have to log into that, and it's very difficult.
Sorry,
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Yeah, we need to get
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I was joking when I said 3 hours earlier. Maybe I shouldn't have suggested that, but yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate you
Big
all.
round of applause for Ron Abora. Okay, amazing. Thanks, Ryan. We have 2 other things to do. You just turn around and feast your eyes upon this eye candy walking in here with a cake. This is our sixth. We're not going to make you sing happy birthday. We're not going to do it. No, we don't have to do it. Just walk in. You're not getting married. Just bring it to the front. Yeah. And who's going to cut the cake? Michael? Do we have a saber?
We do.
Oh, a safe saber.
Thank you.
Okay.